She looked at me and said, "You're too young." But the way her eyes lingered told me she wasn't so sure, and I knew, in that moment, I was ready to prove her wrong. I still remember the first time I really noticed her. It wasn't as if I hadn't seen her before. She was, after all, my friend's mom. But that day was different. Maybe I was different. I had dropped by my friend's house on an ordinary afternoon, the kind of day when the sun paints everything in a soft, golden haze. We were supposed to go out, but he wasn't ready yet. He shouted from his room, telling me to wait in the living room. And then she walked in. There was nothing dramatic about her entrance. No music, no spotlight, just the sound of her footsteps on the polished floor and the faint clinking of the bangles on her wrist. She carried a tray with 2 glasses of juice, smiling politely as she set it down. But my eyes lingered longer than they should have. She was older, of course. You could see it in the small lines that rested around her eyes, the way her movements carried a kind of practiced grace. But there was something striking in that. Not age, but presence. A calmness. A quiet beauty that didn't need to be announced. Her scarf, light and floral, brushed softly against her shoulder as she leaned forward. A faint scent of jasmine rose into the air, subtle yet undeniable. For a moment, the room felt warmer, and I couldn't decide if it was from the sunlight spilling through the curtains or from her. When she looked at me, it wasn't for long, maybe 2 seconds at most. But those 2 seconds changed something inside me. Her eyes were deep, brown with flecks of gold when the light caught them. And for a fraction of a breath, I thought I saw something there. Curiosity, recognition, maybe even hesitation. Then she turned away quickly, almost too quickly, as if reminding herself where the boundaries were. I tried to play it cool. I picked up my glass and took a sip, pretending the chill of the juice could steady the warmth spreading in my chest. But I couldn't ignore the awareness that hung in the room now, invisible yet heavy. When she spoke, her voice was calm and polite. "He won't take long," she said, nodding toward the hallway. Her tone was soft, measured, but it carried something I couldn't quite name. I nodded back, trying to act like her presence didn't matter, but inside, I felt restless. It wasn't just attraction, though I couldn't deny that. It was something deeper, something about the way she carried herself, as if she'd lived through storms I could only imagine. And maybe that's what drew me in. That quiet strength, that grace, that momentary glance that stayed with me long after she left the room. That day, something shifted. She wasn't just my friend's mom anymore. She was her. And though she didn't know it yet, so much of what would follow began with that single, unexpected connection. It was a week later when the words "I'll never forget" first left her lips. The evening was quiet, the kind of evening when everything feels softer. The lamps were glowing with a warm yellow light. The hum of the ceiling fan filled the silence, and the air outside carried the faint scent of rain that had fallen earlier. My friend had left the room to take a call, leaving me sitting at the dining table. She was there too, clearing dishes from the dinner we'd just shared. At first, it was ordinary. She moved gracefully, stacking plates, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek as she worked. I offered to help, and though she hesitated, she eventually let me carry a few things to the kitchen. I followed her in, listening to the soft clink of plates being set in the sink. It was in that small space, surrounded by the smell of dish soap and the sound of running water, that she finally spoke. "You're too young," she said suddenly, her voice steady but quiet, almost as if she was speaking to herself. The words caught me off guard. I turned, not sure if I'd heard her right, but her face told me everything. She wasn't smiling, not the polite, careful smile I was used to. Instead, there was a kind of firmness in her eyes, like she was drawing a line neither of us were supposed to cross. She dried her hands with a towel, her movements slow, deliberate. "You don't understand," she continued, though her gaze stayed fixed on the counter instead of me. "There's a difference between noticing someone and meaning it. And you," she paused, her voice catching just enough for me to hear the weight behind it. "You're too young to understand what that difference costs." Her words were careful, but the air between us was thick with something unspoken. I could feel the distance she was trying to create, the wall she wanted to build. Yet the way she said it, The hesitation that slipped in her tone told me she wasn't as certain as she wanted me to believe. I should have laughed it off. I should have nodded, pretended I didn't know what she meant. But instead, I found myself staring at her, memorizing the curve of her expression, the tightness of her jaw, the way her fingers gripped the towel too firmly, the flicker of unease in her eyes. "You think age makes the difference," I said softly, more to myself than to her. But it doesn't. She finally met my gaze then, and for the first time, I saw more than caution. I saw fear. Not fear of me, but fear of herself, of what she might feel if she let herself believe me. The silence stretched between us, filled only by the dripping of water from a plate she hadn't dried properly. Then she shook her head, her lips pressing into a thin line, as if sealing the conversation shut. She left the kitchen without another word, leaving me standing there, her sentence echoing in my mind. "You're too young." But in the way she'd looked at me, in that fragile hesitation, I found a reason to believe she didn't fully mean it. And that made me want to prove her wrong. After that night in the kitchen, her words stayed with me. "You're too young." They echoed whenever I saw her, like a boundary painted in invisible ink. Always there, always unspoken. But what lingered even more than her warning were the moments that followed. Small things, fleeting, ordinary gestures that shouldn't have mattered, but did. One evening, my friend had gone upstairs to grab something, and I stayed behind in the living room. She came in carrying a plate of fruit, her scarf draped lightly over one shoulder. As she handed me a slice of apple, our fingers brushed. It was nothing, just skin against skin for a second. But I swear I felt a current run through me. She pulled her hand back quickly, her eyes flicking up to mine with a flash of awareness before she turned away. I should have ignored it. Instead, I replayed in my mind for hours afterward. It was always in the small spaces where it happened. Like the time she joined me on the porch after dinner. The house was quiet. Everyone else had gone to bed. I sat staring at the street lights, glowing faintly through the mist. She stepped outside, wrapped in a shawl, and without a word sat down beside me. We didn't speak much, just sat there, side by side, listening to the hum of the night insects. But the silence wasn't empty. It was charged, alive, as if every unsaid word was weaving itself into the space between us. She leaned slightly closer, pointing at something on my phone when I scrolled through pictures. Her shoulder brushed against mine, and she didn't pull away right away. The warmth of her presence pressed against me, subtle, almost unintentional, but impossible to ignore. Even in daylight, the moments found us. Once in the kitchen, I reached past her to grab a glass from the shelf. She turned at the same time, and suddenly we were too close. Close enough that I could see the faint trace of laughter lines near her eyes, the quick intake of her breath as she stepped back. Neither of us mentioned it, but her cheeks flushed, and I couldn't shake the image for days. There's always a kind of rhythm to it. Two people moving carefully, deliberately, pretending not to notice the gravity pulling them closer. But gravity doesn't ask permission. It just works. And I began to realize she noticed me more than she wanted to admit. I saw it in the way her eyes lingered an extra second before darting away, in the way her voice softened when she asked if I wanted more tea, in the way she smiled, faintly, reluctantly, when I said something that caught her off guard. There were moments between the lines, too subtle to name, too brief to confess, yet they built something stronger than words. And while she kept telling herself I was too young, I could see the truth in the way her guard slipped when no one else was watching. She felt it too. It happened on a night that was supposed to be ordinary. There had been a small family gathering at the house, relatives laughing, the smell of food drifting through every corner, the clinking of glasses, and conversations overlapping in a warm chaos. I stayed late, helping clear the table while my friend disappeared upstairs with his cousins, leaving the downstairs quiet again. She was in the living room, switching off lamps one by one. The house felt different in that dim glow, softer, quieter, almost fragile. I was about to leave when I noticed her sitting on the edge of the couch, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Something in her posture stopped me. She wasn't the same confident woman who moved with practiced ease through her home. Tonight, she seemed smaller somehow, her gaze fixed on the floor as though her thoughts weighed heavily. I hesitated, then stepped closer. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice lower than usual, careful not to intrude. She looked up, startled at first, and then gave a faint, tired smile. "I'm fine," she whispered, but the way her voice cracked on the word told me otherwise. I sat down a few feet away, not close enough to make her uncomfortable, but not so far that she felt alone. The silence stretched. Then, slowly, as if the words had been waiting for someone to hear them, she began to speak. She told me about the weight she carried, about raising a family mostly on her own, about sacrifices no one noticed, about the loneliness that came in waves when the house was too quiet. Her voice trembled once or twice, and she would stop, gathering herself before continuing. "I'm not supposed to feel this way," she said softly, eyes glistening as they caught the dim light. "I'm supposed to be strong. I'm supposed to know better. But sometimes it feels like no one really sees me anymore." I didn't interrupt. I didn't try to fix her pain with clumsy words. I just listened. And in that stillness, I think she felt it, that she didn't have to pretend with me. Her hands, folded tightly in her lap, trembled slightly. Without thinking too much, I reached out and placed my hand gently over hers. It was a simple touch, light, steady, no more than a quiet reassurance. But I felt her fingers stiffen, then slowly relax beneath mine. She didn't pull away. For a long moment, we sat like that, her words hanging in the air, my hand covering hers, the quiet of the house wrapping around us. She finally let out a long breath, as if a part of her had been holding it in for years. Her eyes met mine, and in them, I didn't just see strength. I saw fragility. I saw the woman behind the armor she always wore. And in that moment, she knew I saw her, fully, without judgment, without fear. And that changed everything. After that night, in the living room, something changed between us. She hadn't said anything directly, and neither had I. But the air felt different now. Charged, fragile, like the hush that comes after a storm. It showed in the smallest moments. The way her eyes softened when she glanced at me. The way her words, once careful and measured, now carried a warmth she couldn't hide. One morning, I found her in the garden. The sun had just climbed above the rooftops, scattering light through the leaves. She was watering the plants, her hair tied loosely, strands falling gently against her cheeks. There was something disarming about seeing her like that. Not as the perfect hostess, not as someone guarded, but simply as herself. I walked up quietly, and she looked over her shoulder. For a second, her face lit with surprise, then softened into a smile. "You're early," she said, her voice carrying the calm rhythm of the morning. I made some joke about her plants getting more attention than people, and she laughed, not politely, not cautiously, but freely. The sound of it lingered in the air, warm and unguarded. And then it happened. As her laughter faded, she reached out instinctively, resting her hand on my arm. It was such a simple gesture, so natural, as if it belonged there. But this time, unlike before, she didn't pull away immediately. Her fingers stayed, curling lightly against the fabric of my sleeve. Her touch wasn't firm, but it carried weight, a quiet anchor in the space between us. I froze, not out of fear, but because I didn't want to lose the moment. The sunlight filtered through the leaves above us, casting soft patterns across her face. A drop of water slipped from the can she held, running down her wrist, catching the light like glass. She seemed unaware of it, her focus entirely on me. Her eyes lingered, longer than they should have, and I could feel the conflict stirring behind them. She realized it too, because after a few heartbeats, she pulled her hand back, clearing her throat, suddenly busying herself with adjusting a flower pot. But it was too late. The moment had already carved itself into me. That single touch stayed with me long after I left the garden. I could still feel the warmth of her hand on my arm, the way her fingers had pressed ever so slightly, the unspoken message in her hesitation to let go. She hadn't meant for it to matter. Maybe she hadn't even realized what she'd done. But for me, it was everything. It was proof that beneath her guarded words, beneath the distance she tried so hard to maintain, there was something else. Something she felt. Something she couldn't quite deny anymore. And in that fragile, fleeting moment, I knew her walls were starting to crack. It was the rain that betrayed us. The day had been ordinary, uneventful, the kind of day that passes without notice. But as evening fell, the sky grew heavy, clouds rolling in, and soon the first drops began to fall. I had been planning to leave, but she insisted on walking me to the gate. By the time we stepped outside, the drizzle had turned into a steady downpour. She reached for an umbrella hanging by the door, flicked it open, and held it above us. "Come on," she said, her voice half practical, half playful, though her eyes betrayed the flicker of something else. We walked slowly along the path, pressed close beneath the narrow circle of shelter. The sound of rain drummed above us, steady and insistent, a rhythm that seemed to quiet the whole world. Around us, everything blurred. The garden, the streetlights, the distant shapes of houses, all softened by the rain. But inside that small space, everything sharpened. Her shoulder brushed against mine, warm through the thin fabric of my shirt. Every step we took, I could feel her presence. The faint scent of her jasmine perfume mixed now with the freshness of rain, the warmth of her breath as she exhaled, the soft rustle of her shawl against my arm. Neither of us spoke at first. The silence wasn't empty. It was charged, fragile, alive. The kind of silence where every unsaid word hangs heavy in the air, begging to be noticed. At the gate, she stopped walking. For a moment, she didn't move, didn't hand me the umbrella, didn't step back inside. Instead, she stood there with me, the rain cascading just beyond the fragile fabric above us. Her eyes met mine, not in the fleeting, cautious way I'd grown used to, but fully, searching, uncertain, conflicted. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to speak. Instead, her gaze flickered downward, then back up, and she whispered, almost too softly for the rain to let me hear, "You shouldn't make me feel this way." The words landed like lightning. Not loud, not sharp, but powerful in their honesty. I could see the battle in her eyes, the pull of what she wanted against the weight of what she feared. Her hand, still gripping the umbrella handle, trembled just slightly. Instinctively, I steadied it, my fingers brushing against hers. She froze, but she didn't let go. For a long moment, the rain filled the silence between us, the world reduced to water and breath, and the fragile space we shared. I wanted to tell her everything, that I wasn't afraid, that I wasn't going anywhere, that her fear didn't scare me away. But I didn't, because sometimes words are too much, and silence says more. At last, she pulled her hand back, turning toward the house. "You should go," she whispered, though her voice trembled with something more than dismissal. I nodded, stepping into the rain, but the echo of her words followed me long after. "You shouldn't make me feel this way." But I already had, and we both knew it. Days passed after that night in the rain, but her words wouldn't leave me. "You shouldn't make me feel this way." They echoed whenever I thought of her, whenever I remembered the tremble in her voice, the conflict in her eyes. She was torn, I knew it, not because she didn't feel something, but because she did. I saw her again a few days later in the late afternoon. The house was quieter than usual, the kind of silence that feels almost intentional. My friend had stepped out, leaving me waiting in the living room. She appeared in the doorway, her shawl draped loosely, her hair falling in soft waves around her face. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She looked tired, not from the day, but from carrying a weight inside her for too long. I stood, uncertain whether to break the silence, but she did it for me. "You know this isn't easy," she said softly, her voice steady but fragile. She moved closer, her eyes fixed on the floor until she finally met mine. People would talk. They would judge. And maybe they'd be right. "You're young, too young to know what you want." And me, her voice faltered, "I'm old enough to know better." Her words carried truth, but also fear. The fear of being seen, of being questioned, of choosing something her world wouldn't understand. I took a slow breath and stepped closer. Maybe they'd talk. I admitted, my voice low, but they don't matter. They don't see you the way I do. They don't know the strength you carry, the way you care, the way you make a room feel alive just by being in it. I know what I want, and I'm not afraid of it. Her eyes searched mine, as if waiting for me to falter, to reveal hesitation. But I didn't. I couldn't, because in that moment, there was nothing truer than what I felt. She shook her head lightly, as though clinging to her doubts, but her hand betrayed her. It lifted, almost unconsciously, brushing against my arm. The touch was tentative, trembling, but it was there. I covered her hand with mine, steady and sure. "I'm not too young," I whispered. "I'm just too ready to lose this. To lose you." Her lips parted, and for a moment, I thought she'd argue. Instead, her shoulders dropped, the fight slipping out of her, leaving only honesty behind. A small, fragile smile curved on her lips, the first one in weeks that looked unburdened. She stepped closer, resting her forehead gently against my chest. I felt her breath against me, warm and unsteady, her heartbeat quickening before gradually slowing. My arms lifted carefully, wrapping around her, not with urgency, but with the patience of someone who had waited for this moment to finally arrive. The room was still, filled only with the quiet rhythm of her breathing, the soft drift of the evening air through the window. In that silence, nothing else mattered. Not the world outside, not the doubts, not the age between us. There was only her, and me, and the truth we could no longer deny. And that was the moment everything changed between us. If this story touched you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more slow-burn age gap romances, and share it with someone who believes love can be found in the most unexpected places.